He was getting rid of the downtrodden all over the world.
Yeah.
That's what that.
Do you guys
Rockefeller
agree or
was not a
disagree with
good guy in that way. He was a control freak.
We have to separate the Rockefellers, the John D. the first from John D. the second and John D. the third. John D. the first and Andrew Carnegie, as Larry was saying earlier, really were contributing more to institutions, building, as Larry was saying, building libraries, contributing to science, eliminating problems with the boll weevil and this kind of thing, giving to black colleges and institutions.
So it was Junior.
Now, Junior and the third, that's when you get the foreign policy.
Foreign policy.
Yes, Council on Foreign Relations.
Right, because
yes.
I
that
agree
is
with you, Gerard.
the son and the grandson.
You got to dig down. Even the first and second you're talking about, the whole point was, yes, in appearance to us when we read history books,
right.
Oh, he created these schools and these medical things. But the bottom line was he created people that were dependent on him to stay in power.
But John D. Rockefeller was really retired by 1900, and that's a movement that begins in the progressive era.
His money wasn't.
Okay. Well, that's true.
His money wasn't retired.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking. I don't know if you heard during the break. I said, my problem is that, that money can reach beyond the grave.
That's right.
And I think it was Vanderbilt who said, the more money I have, the more I give my children, the more damage I do to them, because they don't have the struggle that I had that made me the man.
And it's interesting, Bert's done a lot of research on the children of these so-called robber barons.
Yeah.
And I think it was Billy Vanderbilt was about the only one of these children who came anywhere close to the level of his father.
It's the same story over and over again. That's why we have the hippie generation of the 1960s that were so rebellious, because their parents went through World War II, the Great Depression, and they wanted to give their kids a strife-free life. And so they did, and you're special, and you're never going to have to go through that. And the children always rebel. They always rebel from that. And quite honestly, I think turn into monsters a lot of the times.
John D. Rockefeller would have been better served not to have started the Rockefeller Foundation and turned it over to his son. I agree.
Let's see, it was Rodney. Rodney, you had a question?
How you doing, Glenn? Growing up, I'm a very conservationist-based person.
Yeah.
Do a lot of hunting, a lot of woods. So growing up, I always learned that Teddy Roosevelt was obviously just like great conservationist. So I just wanted to know personally if you thought of him as a villain or a hero. Personally, I always thought of him as a hero, but now
I tell you that Theodore Roosevelt, and I haven't done enough homework on him to be. I mean, I've turned every stone over on Woodrow Wilson. I hate that guy.
Send all the information to me so I can learn.
Right. I haven't done my work. I will tell you that I talked to who is it? R.J. Pastrito, who's writing a book now on Theodore Roosevelt, and I said to him, R.J., I'm going to hate this guy, aren't I? And he said, oh yeah, you are. I think he had a lot of good things to him. I love his fierce independence. I love the idea that he was really an American. He said hyphen American names. We're all Americans. And he was a conservationist. He did get that. But he also is the guy who started the Progressive Party. He is the guy that, said, we're going to look at how that wealth is earned. If you can earn it as a benefit to the whole, well, then we'll let you earn it and keep some of it. But then how do you spend it? Well, no thank you.
And you know where that comes from? And I think this is Teddy Roosevelt's greatest failing, is that he did so many things in his life, so many incredible things. He never really ran and owned a business that had to make a profit. And as a result, I don't think he ever got in touch with having to meet a payroll, having to worry about, gee, are we going to be here next month? What's going to happen to my employees?
See, and you guys would be able to help me on this. Where I get in trouble on progressivism is I do see it as a disease. It is a disease that is the cancer of the Constitution. And so I don't look at any, and I know some people do, oh, well, that's a good cancer. Well, no, just because it's going to eat you slower doesn't, cancer is bad. And so I see progressivism as a cancer. I'd like to get your opinion on that when we come back in a second.
Good phrase. That's a good phrase.
America, the one thing that you really have to wrap your arms around, and you can disagree with me, but do your own homework. By the way, Final Moments with Larry Schweikart and Burton Folsom Jr. Is the progressive movement, as I said before the break, is a cancer of the Constitution. If you agree with it, great. Then let's be honest about it. Let's move forward. But it is a cancer. Woodrow Wilson was deadly quickly. Theodore Roosevelt was much slower in that. And tell me if you think you disagree. John McCain is Theodore Roosevelt.
Yes.
And Wilson is Barack Obama. But they're both progressives. Reason why I think that Teddy Roosevelt is dangerous, just like John McCain, you wouldn't have had the Tea Party movement. You wouldn't have had necessarily people waking up until it was, because it would have been slower, subtler, and
there was an overtness to Teddy Roosevelt. He went after Rockefeller. He went after James J. Hill, who had built the first transcontinental railroad that took no subsidies. It beat the ones that got the federal subsidies, and Roosevelt went after it. He initiated the Hepburn Act, which regulated the railroads and made it hard for them to compete. So there was an element of Roosevelt that went after business and markets very, very hard.
But wasn't that important? I know the Pennsylvania Railroad was the first one. I can't remember the name of the guy, but the guy who built Pennsylvania Station was the first guy to say, what was his name?
J. Edgar Thompson.
Yeah, said no corruption, no graft, we're not paying any bribes, et cetera, et cetera. And he really was depending on Roosevelt to help break that graft up, wasn't he?
Well, you're talking about the Northern Securities Act?
I'm talking about, yes, about 1904. Yeah, I thought it was 02, but yeah. So Roosevelt needed to come in and clean some of that up, did he, or not?
Well, but then when you're cleaning James J. Hill out of the picture, or at least preventing him from consolidating the Great Northern, the two railroads he had, you're working against the one man who was able to achieve railroad building without transcontinental railroad, without federal subsidies.
Okay, Kaylin, you had a question?
Yes, my question was, in the progressive movement and its original roots, how does public education play a role in that with our founders such as Horace Mann and John Dewey, who are big advocates of public education?
Well, yeah, that's a great question.
Good question.
The answer goes to the essence of reform. I keep coming, of progressivism, keep coming back to this, is reform. It's all about reforming to what? To perfection. The idea that whether they're children, whether they're corporations, whether they're city governments, you can, if you just keep reforming them long enough, you will finally get to perfection. And it's a view that denies human sin. I hate to go there, but that's the point. It denies human sin.
I mean, it is really the collective salvation thing. I mean, if you look at it, it really is the whole misunderstanding of humans can be perfect if you just have an administrator, just administrate all the time and just keep them in this little box. Humans can be perfect, which is a lie, and that there's collective salvation, that we'll all be saved together, right?
Exactly.
So it is really kind of, the roots of it.
The roots.
Are extraordinarily spiritual. Evil, really.
Yes.
Right?
Well, and John Dewey was a progressive. That was a good question. Dewey was a progressive, supported the progressives.
But the whole idea, and maybe this will answer your question, the whole idea was they needed to disconnect us from our founders, because we talked about our founders. We learned how great these guys were, so we modeled ourselves after them. We talked about our Constitution, which stopped them from moving progress past it. When Wilson got in, he hated the Constitution, hated it. It's an old dusty document. And the other was religion. They had to progress past those three things, and the key was education. Change the history. Does that answer your question?
Well, studying the history was not even that important. You know, it's experimental.
It's what Michelle Obama, we just heard.
Sure.
Change the history. Make it old, outdated. Yeah. Make these, if it's a progressive movement, the first time that we had heard that these guys were just rich, white people that just, it's amazing that the biggest racists of the 20th century were the progressives, and they were calling the founders racists.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Yes.
Back in a second. We want to leave you with one story that I find fascinating about Coca-Cola, Larry.
All right. The FDA under Roosevelt goes after Coca-Cola on the grounds that it supposedly has cocaine in it. When they have this big trial, they can't show there's any cocaine in it. They then turn around and try to sue Coke for false advertising.
But there is no cocaine. That is big government at its best. We will continue our summer of restoration. I encourage you to read original sources as much as you can. I encourage you to read as much as you can. Know what you believe and why you believe it. From New York, good night, America.